60 kilometers off the coast of Hainan Island, China built something the ocean was never supposed to allow: a solar farm floating on open sea. It covers more surface area than the entire country of Monaco, made up of roughly 250,000 individual solar panels sitting on a lattice, designed to bend with the waves instead of fight them. For decades, engineers considered this basically impossible in open ocean, because deep-sea conditions destroy standard solar equipment within months, not years. This one plant solved 4 separate problems that had blocked offshore solar for a decade, and it took about 8 years of development to combine all 4 into a single working system. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how each of those 4 problems was solved, and why this technology could eventually power a meaningful share of the planet. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface, and even a tiny fraction of that space used for floating solar would dwarf anything ever built on land. That is the real reason this specific project matters. It proves the open ocean itself can finally be used, not just calm reservoirs and sheltered bays. Start with the enemy every offshore engineer fears the most: salt. Standard solar panel frames are built for rain and dust, but the open ocean is roughly 2 orders of magnitude more aggressive: constant salt spray, full immersion during storm swell, biological buildup, and sunlight made even harsher by the sea reflecting 6 to 8% more radiation back onto the panels. Engineers answered this with marine-grade aluminum frames coated against salt spray, floats built from UV-stabilized high-density polyethylene, and sealed marine-grade tinned copper wiring running through the entire array. The published design life for all of this sitting in open seawater is 25 years, which is actually conservative next to the 30-year lifespan claimed by many ordinary land-based solar farms. The second problem almost sounds like a contradiction. The panels had to survive violent waves without being built rigid. At the Hainan site, winter monsoon waves reach 4 to 6 meters, and a rigid structure under that kind of repeated pounding does not survive. It fatigues and cracks, especially with brittle glass panels sitting on top of it. The solution was a flexible HDPE lattice with flexible couplers between each float, letting the whole structure absorb wave energy instead of concentrating stress at any single mounting point. Engineers tested the design in wave tanks at the China Ship Scientific Research Center, and in seas above 4 meters, the panels simply tilt to a low angle to cut wind load rather than fail outright. The third enemy is invisible and grows on almost anything left sitting in the ocean. Barnacles, mussels, algae, and biofilm all attached to submerged structures, blocking sunlight from reaching the glass and adding mechanical weight the floats were never meant to carry. The Hainan panels use a copper oxide-loaded coating rated to resist fouling for at least 5 years, combined with a curved lattice shape that discourages biofilm from attaching in the first place. The platform was also built wide enough for cleaning boats to move through the array without destabilizing it. And none of these 3 tricks alone was new. The breakthrough was making all 3 work together at once. Even a perfect floating panel is worthless if the electricity cannot actually get to shore. The plant uses a 220 kilovolt AC subsea cable, buried in a trench on the seabed, running the full 60 kilometers back to an onshore substation built to offshore wind farm cabling standards. This single cable is the most expensive part of the entire project, costing several million yuan per kilometer to install, and it accounts for somewhere between 18 and 25% of the total capital cost. Grid-forming inverters and a synchronous condenser system keep the output stable even as clouds and ocean glint change the sunlight hitting the panels minute to minute, feeding directly into Hainan's provincial power grid. Because solar output is more predictable than wind, engineers note this cable was actually somewhat easier to size than an equivalent offshore wind farm cable would have been. Put the raw numbers together, and the real scale becomes clear. Around 250,000 panels generate an estimated 200 megawatts of peak direct current capacity, producing somewhere between 280 and 320 gigawatt hours of electricity every year across roughly 2 to 2.5 square kilometers of ocean. Industry estimates put the cost of that electricity at roughly 0.30 to 0.40 RMB per kilowatt hour, which already undercuts Hainan's coal-fired power, estimated at 0.40 to 0.45 RMB per kilowatt hour. The total construction cost is estimated at 2 to 3 billion RMB. though the exact engineering figures have never been officially published in full detail. One claim about this plant needs to be corrected before it spreads any further. Some reports describe the entire farm rotating to track the sun through the day, but the published engineering literature does not support that for a lattice this size. Tracking 250,000 interconnected panels as a single rigid body in open ocean waves is an extreme engineering problem that has not actually been solved at this scale. The most accurate description is limited single-axis tracking on small panel groups, with the overall lattice anchored in place rather than rotating as one unit. China did not choose this location by accident. Hainan's electricity demand is climbing fast because of tourism and its development as a free trade port under an ongoing central government initiative. What Hainan does not have is flat, sunny land. Most of what remains is either protected agricultural ground or hilly terrain unsuitable for large solar farms. What it does have is offshore construction capability, already built up for offshore wind in the South China Sea, meaning most of the marine engineering skill needed for floating solar already existed. This fits directly into China's stated climate goal, peaking carbon emissions before 2030 and reaching carbon neutrality before 2060. A target the government announced back in 2020. And this is not even the largest version of this technology currently in the works. Trade press reports describe a second offshore floating solar installation already under active construction in the South China Sea, reported to be 3 times the size of the Hainan plant. If accurate, that would put its capacity near 600 megawatts DC across roughly 6 to 7.5 square kilometers of ocean, though the specific engineering details remain undisclosed. Not everything about this project is confirmed, and it is worth being honest about that before drawing conclusions. The exact nameplate capacity is usually rounded to around 200 megawatts rather than published precisely, and the electricity cost figures are industry projections, not audited results. Nobody has publicly addressed how this lattice performs in an actual typhoon, which matters enormously given that the South China Sea sits directly inside a typhoon belt. Step back, and 3 real implications come out of this single demonstration plant. First, it proves offshore floating solar works at real utility scale in open ocean, removing a major technical risk that had blocked the entire industry for years. Second, the cost numbers suggest it can already beat coal in the right conditions: land scarce, sun-rich, and close to shore, a description that fits a huge amount of coastal Asia. Third, the fact that both state-owned and private investors backed a project this large signals real institutional confidence that this technology is ready to scale beyond a single demonstration. 4 engineering problems, 8 years of development, and 1 60-kilometer cable turned an idea considered impossible into a working power plant. So the floating city of panels off Hainan is not a novelty. It is a working proof that the ocean itself can generate power at industrial scale. What we have not covered yet is what happens when this same idea gets applied somewhere far less forgiving than the South China Sea. There is a version of this technology already being pushed toward waters that see far more violent conditions than anything Hainan has faced. That story is really the test of whether floating solar can survive the roughest oceans on Earth, or whether Hainan was actually the easier version of this problem. It also gets into how engineers are trying to scale the cable and mooring systems for installations several times larger than this one. Watch that video next, because it directly answers the one question this video deliberately left open. Can this technology handle real open ocean extremes? The 4 problems solved here, salt, waves, biofouling, and transmission, all get harder as the installations get bigger and the seas get rougher. Understanding how Hainan solved them at 200 megawatts is really the baseline for understanding what comes next at 600 megawatts and beyond. That next plant, 3 times the size, is the clearest sign yet of where this entire technology is heading. Every one of the numbers in this video, the cost, the capacity, the design life, will be tested at a much larger scale very soon. So if this plant looked impossible, the next one is designed to look even more so, and that is exactly why it is worth watching next. Go watch that video now to see whether floating solar can actually survive the most violent oceans on the planet.